And today we have our friend, already repeated guest in our webinars, founder and CEO of Elemental Growth, Phil Carter. Hi, Phil. How are you doing?
I'm good, Andre. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, sure. And today we would like to discuss like cancellation flows, and cancellation flows is like the powerful tool to improve your retention rate in your mobile apps and in your web funnels. And there are a lot of tactics, a lot of tiny details that you need to consider in optimization funnel cancellation flows, and you can optimize it in Funnelfox web funnel builder. Okay, let's get started. We have a recording and all materials and presentation, and recording will be sent after webinar in follow-up emails. Let's get started.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Andre. I'm excited to be talking about cancellation flows today. I feel like this is one of those topics that gets overlooked and underappreciated. Historically, by consumer subscription apps, there's so much attention paid to acquiring your customers and converting them into subscribers in the first place, and less attention retaining them, and specifically less attention trying to save them if they attempt to cancel. And there are good and bad ways to do that. And so we're going to talk about some of the best practices that I found working with dozens of consumer subscription clients over the years on cancellation flows as the rules currently stand. We're also going to talk about a new rule imposed by the FTC that goes into effect in just 2 weeks on July 14th, called the Click-to-Cancel rule. And that is going to have very important new restrictions and implications for consumer subscription apps that will change some of these best practices. So we'll talk through all of that today. Before we jump in, a little bit about me. So my name's Phil Carter. I have basically spent my entire career in consumer technology. I'm currently the founder and CEO at Elemental Growth, which is a growth advising and consulting firm focused 100% on consumer subscription businesses. We generally work with C to Series C companies that already have some amount of product market fit, but are looking for how to scale their businesses faster and more cost efficiently. So I'm a full-time growth advisor and angel investor. And then prior to starting this business a couple of years ago, I was the head of product expansion at FTC, and led international category net market expansion there. Before that, built the product growth team at Quizlet for 3.5 years. And then before that, I was the first PM at Ibotta and ultimately led their consumer product team. So that's my background, and I live and breathe consumer subscription apps every day and love these businesses. And so I'm excited to just share some of my experience. So as far as the agenda today, we're going to talk about a few topics. First, retention is king. So why subscriber retention is the single most important metric that separates the top consumer subscription apps from the rest. Second, we'll get into very specific cancellation flow do's and don'ts. So what your businesses can be doing to follow best practices to minimize subscriber churn. Third, we'll go through 4 examples of really good cancellation flows from Headspace, Strava, Fitbod, and Matter. So everything from like very large billion-dollar plus companies that are on the verge of going public to much smaller startups, which may be more relevant to some of the folks in the audience today. And then we'll spend a little bit of time specifically talking about the implications of the click-to-cancel rule, and then we'll open it up for open Q&A at the end. Please do, I already see some chatter in the chat. Please do drop your questions there. We want to make this as conversational as possible. I don't want to just be talking at you for the next 30 to 40 minutes. So if you have questions as I go, please speak up early and often, and Andre and Maria will help me facilitate those. Okay, so let's start with retention is king. And this is probably something that everyone in the audience has heard before, at least I hope you have. There are all sorts of KPIs that we look at as consumer subscription app leaders, but subscriber retention really is the #1 most important metric that separates the best from the rest. And a little bit of data to back this up. So this comes from 30,000 consumer subscription apps. And we'll start with P75 apps. So these are apps in the top quartile. But even these top quartile apps are losing more than half of their annual subscribers in 1 year and more than half of their monthly subscribers in just 3 months. And that's a really hard foundation to build a venture scale business on, right? If you're losing more than half your subscribers that quickly, that's the foundation of your revenue engine. And you've got kind of a leaky bucket problem. And this is apps in the top quartile, right? And so anybody lower than P75 is just going to have worse retention. But it turns out that when you look at P95 consumer subscription apps, they're performing significantly better. So well over 60% 3-month retention on monthly subscribers and well over 60% 1-year retention on annual subscribers. This is much healthier. These are much healthier numbers, and the types of numbers that a venture scale business can really be built on, because that retention compounds over time. And a visual that I'll highlight to demonstrate this, many of you may be familiar with Flow. It's one of the top, it's probably the top subscription app in the women's health category. And the CEO, Dmitry Gursky, is very active on social media, including LinkedIn. And he shows these great charts highlighting both where subscriber growth and subscription revenue growth is coming from, as well as on the free user side, where MAU retention is coming from. And what you can see is, in many cases, it's these older cohorts of subscribers that have been around for 2, 3, 4+ years that are driving well over 50% of their revenue. And so the reason I call this out is it can be easy to be overly fixated on top of funnel acquisition and activation and new user subscriber conversion. And that's very, very important. But ultimately, retention is the most important thing. And cancellation flows are one of many levers you can use to improve subscriber retention. If you have a really well-designed cancellation flow that strikes the right balance between being easy to find and not using black hat tactics, but that is still finding ways to remind the user of the value they'll lose if they cancel their subscription, and potentially offering them a discount to stick around, you can really improve subscriber retention on the margins. So that's where I wanted to start, is just sort of laying a foundation rooted in empirical data on why subscriber retention is so important and making the connection between subscriber retention and cancellation. So now we'll get into more of the tactics around how do you actually build well-designed cancellation flows that follow best practices. So we'll start conceptual, and then we'll get into specific examples. So first, I just want to highlight that companies have increasingly made it difficult for users to cancel subscriptions. And this can be very tempting because it's sort of a cheap short-term way to improve your retention rates and reduce your cancellation rates. Things like burying the cancellation flow under multiple submenus so that a customer can never find it. I've even seen cases where you have to exit the website or mobile app altogether and go to like some very esoteric FAQ page to find the link to the cancellation flow. And so it's sort of making it next to impossible for the consumer to cancel. I won't name specific names, but my wife and I have 2 daughters. We used a service for finding babysitters for a number of years. And this is perhaps the worst example I can remember in recent memory of where we found it so difficult to cancel the subscription when we no longer needed it, that we had to call multiple times into a support line and talk to a human being to get them to cancel our subscription. And even then they wouldn't do it at first. So there were just so many tactics they were using to sort of, strong arm us and make it impossible for us to cancel our subscription. And as a result, when we needed babysitting support again, we never went back to that. We found a competitor and we used the competitor instead because we were so frustrated with the negative experience we had in canceling the subscription. And so using these tactics, while it can be tempting, leads to higher ticket volumes, more customer service complaints, increased customer support costs. It also, over time, can tarnish your brand. It can reduce your net promoter score. It can lead to negative word of mouth, which slows down top of funnel acquisition. And then in a worst case scenario, it can lead to higher refund and dispute rates. And so this is something that companies experienced in particular during the pandemic, when consumers were frustrated, they were under a lot of stress, and banks made it much easier for consumers to dispute charges on their bank statements. And as a result, refunds and dispute rates became a real problem. And if these dispute rates get high enough, they can actually lead to real penalties with payment processors and credit card networks. So these are all the risks you need to be aware of if you're crossing the line and going too far with how you're approaching your cancellation flow.
Yeah, it also can ruin your review rating in App Store, even
Absolutely.
if you can handle all these refunds and disputes anyway. The customers will find a way to complain on Trustpilot or App Store, and it ruins your brand.
Yeah, that's a great call out. I mean, we talked about the impact it can have on your brand, your net promoter score, offline word of mouth, but it can also have direct effects on App Store ratings, App Store reviews. And, people figure this out. If you're not treating your consumers well, then eventually it's going to catch up with you. So don't do that. Be fair to your consumers, treat them well. The other thing I'll call out here is there are a number of macro trends that have been playing out over the last few years that are making it even more risky to engage in some of these unethical tactics. So one is just on the consumer side, I think there's more and more subscription fatigue and frustration with hidden cancellation flows that's causing people to demand refunds, dispute charges, or another thing we're seeing is people are just canceling auto renew immediately when they start a trial or as soon as they purchase a subscription even, right? They want to try the subscription, but if it's a monthly or annual plan, they're going to turn off auto renew right away. And that way they know that they won't be auto charged when the next renewal cycle comes up. They'll have to make an explicit decision to renew the subscription. Number two, banks and credit cards have introduced a dispute charge button that allows consumers to dispute charges with a single click on their bank statement. Like I said, this cropped up during the pandemic, and it was one of the many things that contributed to a spike in dispute rates and refund rates over a couple of years between 2020 and 2022. Apple made an update in 2022 with iOS 16 that makes it much easier for users to view, manage, and cancel their iPhone app subscriptions in one place. For those of you who have iPhones, you've probably used this yourself many times. And then finally, and we're going to have a whole section on this towards the end of the webinar, the FTC has introduced this legislation that will require companies to simplify their cancellation processes by allowing consumers to terminate services the same way that they signed up, right? So like if you subscribe on web or on a mobile device, then you have to be able to cancel on web or a mobile device. You can't force consumers to like call a phone number or do something more complicated to cancel. And also the process for canceling the subscription has to be just as short or shorter in terms of the number of clicks as it was to convert into a subscriber in the first place. Right now, you have so many companies where it's like, it's so easy to convert into a subscriber. It's 1 or 2 clicks. And sometimes it feels like you're not even subscribing at all because they make it so seamless. And then it's like 20 clicks to get through the cancellation flow. That will be illegal.
Yeah, or even you need to send an email to support or like to give a call to support line. So it's because it's insane.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
almost impossible to cancel subscription. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I will say too, I mean, this FTC ruling is specific to the US, so I don't believe this applies to most international markets, but we know that a significant percentage of global consumer app monetization happens in the US. And even if you're an international company, you're probably in many cases serving US customers. And so this is just very important to be aware of. So what should companies do with all of this context in mind? I think the goal at a very high level is to make it very easy and simple for users to find cancellation flows, but introduce some amount of psychological friction that makes it more difficult for them to follow through with canceling their subscription. So specifics here, provide users with a way to cancel both on web and in your mobile apps. But I will say it can be difficult to make, so especially if you're a small startup, it can be difficult to maintain both a native app cancellation flow and a web-based cancellation flow. And so what a number of apps do is, even if you're on the mobile app, once you trigger the cancellation flow, usually from settings, manage subscription, then it will take you to a web view. And that way they're just maintaining a single web-based cancellation flow. Number two, put cancellation flows in a logical place. This is one of the most important things, right? Like people expect that they're going to be able to cancel their subscription under settings or profile. And then typically there's sort of a second click for manage subscription, manage account, the language can vary, but that flow is pretty standard. And so if you have anything that doesn't look like settings manage subscription or profile manage subscription, there should be a very good reason for why you're deviating from that norm, because otherwise you're going to have consumers who get confused and can't find it. And they're going to write in and complain or write you a negative app store rating or review, as Andre brought up, or dispute the charge. Number three, ask users why they are canceling. So we've done enough subscription pricing and packaging surveys with the clients that we work with that oftentimes what we hear is people actually love the subscription. Something has changed with their work. They're going through a financial hardship and they just can't afford, a $40 or $80 or $120 a year subscription anymore. And so they would continue to subscribe if there was a discount that kind of met them where they are. And in many cases, consumer subscription apps have very low marginal costs to serve additional subscribers. And so it's not that hard to offer a discount to users who really need it. And so asking users why they're canceling helps your users to feel heard and understood. It provides you valuable data that you can use to continue improving your product experience. And if a user says they're canceling due to cost, or in some cases, even if they say they're not canceling due to cost, you can offer them a one-time discount if they choose not to cancel. And then finally, just remind users of the value that they're giving up. In many cases, users who are going through a cancellation flow have probably been dormant for a period of days or weeks or even months. And so they haven't used the premium features in a while. And you'd be surprised how many times just reminding them of the advantages of the premium subscription can trigger a little bit of a change of heart of like, okay, I forgot that I had all of these premium features at my disposal. Maybe I should give it another try before I cancel. Okay, so we're going to move into some specific examples here: Headspace, Strava, Fitbod, and Matter. I could have chosen all public consumer subscription apps like Duolingo, Spotify, or I could have chosen all billion-dollar-plus companies, but I wanted to provide a range here. So Headspace and Strava are both in the like $2 to $3 billion valuation range. Fitbod and Matter are smaller companies, and that was intentional because I wanted to show sort of a range of different approaches based on the amount of resources you have. I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat yet, but if folks have questions, please drop them in there, and Andre and I are happy to discuss them as we go.
Yeah, sure.
So getting into our first example. So I'm leading with Headspace because this is one of my favorite cancellation flows. And I realize you may not be able to read all of the text here. We can always send out screenshots afterwards that are a little larger. But what I love about this cancellation flow, it kind of follows all the best practices that I've already highlighted, right? So it makes cancellation easy to find under settings. You go to settings and then account and subscription, and then you can easily enter the cancellation flow from there. It asks users why they're canceling. I don't use it enough, it costs too much, or other. So they keep it very simple. There's not a huge long list of options. They offer a discount if the user says they're canceling due to cost, which we already brought up. In Headspace's case, this is 50%, but I've seen it be much lower in some cases. It adds cognitive friction by reminding users of all the premium content and features they'll lose. And in Headspace's case, they go even further. They really tailor this to the Headspace user experience. So the first screen is when they get into the premium features that a consumer will lose is why don't you sleep on it? And obviously a huge part of Headspace and Calm and other meditation apps is helping people sleep better. And so it kind of plays naturally into their brand tone and their value promise. And then finally, it ends with a polite note, just letting users know that they can always renew. So going back to the most important points here, it's easy to find the cancellation flow. They don't bury it. The cancellation flow isn't that long. Like they've got one screen where they ask why the user's canceling, one screen where they offer the discount, and then a carousel of 3 screens where they remind people of the premium feature value, but it's not like it's 10, 20, 30 screens long. And they're just very polite and friendly with the tone that they're using in this flow. They're not strong-arming the user. They're not trying to bait and switch the user. They're being very transparent, but they're also being clear about why they think the subscription is valuable. So that's example number 1 is Headspace. Example number 2 is Strava. And Strava follows a lot of the same best practices. So I'm not going to keep repeating these over and over again. That they make the cancellation flow easy to find under settings. They add cognitive friction by reminding them of premium feature value. They ask the user why they're canceling. The big thing that Strava does differently, which I haven't seen as often, but I think it's a really clever tactic, is they remind the user if they're on a monthly subscription plan that they can actually save a significant amount of money over the course of 12 months if they switch to the annual plan. In Strava's case, it's a pretty sizable cost reduction if they move from monthly to annual. And so they have the potential here to actually turn a negative into a positive. Now, I'm not pretending that a huge percentage of people who go through this flow are going to go from canceling monthly to converting into annual. But even if it's only 1 or 2%, they've taken a significant negative in terms of revenue and LTV and actually turned it into a positive. Because even with that discount, chances are they're going to come out ahead in terms of LTV on an annual subscriber.
It's kind of like counterintuitive to offer annual subscription when a user try to cancel the subscription, the monthly subscription. Yeah, it's like it's not obvious.
Exactly. Yeah, it's almost the opposite of what you would expect. But what I like about it is it projects strength, right? Instead of being like, we're so sorry, we didn't meet your needs, please don't go, which generally isn't going to work. Instead, they're like, look, we would love to continue to have you as a subscriber. Don't leave your goals behind. We're reminding you of the premium feature value. We want to understand why you're canceling. And if cost is the issue, then why don't you just move to an annual plan and you'll save, I think it's like 40% or more in Strava's case by switching to the annual plan versus the monthly.
Yeah.
So that's a clever tactic that I don't see many apps using, but I could see it being valuable. Okay, so those first 2 examples were larger companies with a lot of resources, And as I said, like the cancellation flow isn't usually the first thing that gets a lot of love, because not everybody goes through it. And generally growth teams and product teams are focused on flows and product surface areas that have the most exposure to users. So not everybody is going to have the resources to perfect the ideal cancellation flow. So these next two examples are smaller companies. Fitbod, I don't know exactly how much revenue they're doing, but they've been around, I don't know, 5-6 years. Strength training app, small team. I believe it's mostly bootstrapped, but they're doing millions of dollars in ARR, and so they have enough resources to do more than nothing. And so they make the cancellation flow easily accessible under settings. They have a couple questions where they just ask users to rate their overall experience with the app and answer a couple short questions. So this is, in this particular case, I think these questions are less to save the user, and they're more to help Fitbod build this continuous feedback loop on why people are canceling and what they could do better to try to avoid getting people to the cancellation flow in the first place, right? To make the core product experience so good that people don't even enter the cancellation flow. So they ask, did you strength train consistently before using Fitbod? Do you currently do strength training workouts regularly? And what is the main reason you decided to cancel your Fitbod subscription? And so I think what that does, what is the main reason you decided to cancel? We already saw with Headspace and Strava, but the first two, I think they're trying to get a read on, were you already into strength training or not before you downloaded this app? Because that gives you a read on, maybe a significant percentage of the people canceling are newcomers to strength training that tried Fitbod on a whim. Maybe they did it because they had a New Year's resolution, which is pretty common in the health and fitness space. But then after a month or two, they just flamed out. And that's a very different set of implications for what the company needs to be doing versus I'm really into strength training. I came to Fitbod because everybody told me it was the best strength training app out there, but I was really disappointed by it. And so then I left. And then the second question is related, which is, do you currently do strength training workouts regularly? Because if the answer is no, then Fitbod fell down on their value promise to try to get people to more consistently invest in strength training. And so that's valuable data. So they use that exit survey feedback to continuously improve the product experience and minimize future churn. And then they end with this sort of funny, lighthearted note, thanking the user with this GIF and letting them know to reach out to support if they change their mind. So that's example number 3, Fitbod. And then the last example is Matter. So Matter is a Y Combinator company in the read it later space. Actually, with Pocket just shutting down recently, a lot of people have been moving over from Pocket to Matter. And this is a small startup. It's a small team, but it's a very well-designed app. It's one app of the day multiple times with Apple. And they go the route of just keeping it super simple. So like everybody else I've already highlighted, they make the cancellation flow easily accessible under settings, but then it's really short and sweet. It's just, you go to settings, you go to manage subscription, you cancel, and that's it. So what I don't love about this is they aren't taking the additional steps that I mentioned in some of the other examples of asking the user why they're canceling and trying to remind them of the premium feature they're giving up. But this is much better than a long, drawn out cancellation flow. It's just going to irritate users, lead to bad app store ratings, bad reviews, negative word of mouth, bad brand impressions. And so if you're a very small startup or if you're a solo developer and you just don't have the resources to do all these other things, my advice would be keep it simple, keep it customer friendly. And this is going to also serve you particularly well when all of these new click-to-cancel provisions go into effect. And that's a good segue into the next section. So I want to spend 10 minutes or so talking about this click-to-cancel rule that's going to go into effect within the next few weeks. But before I do that, I'm seeing some questions start to come through.
Yeah, we have 2 questions. Yeah, we can cover them right now. So what's the optimal number of screens for cancellation flow? Any benchmarks?
Yeah, this is, I'm laughing because I have my own private Slack group for consumer subscription app leaders. And somebody this morning in this Slack group asked, what's the ideal number of screens in an onboarding flow? And I said, well, that's a really hard question to answer because it really depends on who your target customer is, what your value promise is, and then based on that, how long your onboarding flow needs to be. On one end of the spectrum, you have an app like Noom that has demonstrated that a highly personalized 100+ screen onboarding flow can be really effective because people feel heard. In Noom's case, maybe they've tried a lot of other weight loss treatments and they haven't worked. And so they really need to build confidence with the users, and an long onboarding flow can do that if it's done right. On the other end of the spectrum, you have an app like, All Trails, where in many cases, they're out on the trail. They just want to get started. And so you want a very short onboarding flow that just gets out of their way. With cancellation flows, I think it's less variable because the end of the day, like there's really only so many things to do, right? You want to remind people of the premium feature value. You want to ask them why they're canceling. You want to offer them a discount and then let them go. So I don't think the cancellation flow should ever be more than, I don't know, 10 screens at the very most. Ideally, like more like 5 or 6 or less. Now, having said that, and this gets to the second question from Mary, so will legal requirements around number of click screens impact cancellation flows? Yes, and this is part of what we're going to cover in this next section on the click-to-cancel rule. Because one of the things the click-to-cancel rule says is, at a high level, cancellation needs to be every bit as easy or easier than subscribing in the first place. But then very specifically, what that means for a digital mobile app or a digital web app is you have to have the same number of clicks or fewer clicks in your cancellation flow as you had in the conversion flow on the front end. So, and that doesn't include like, all right, I have a 20 screen onboarding quiz. No, it's like if the user can hit a paywall, click subscribe, and then if they're on an iPhone device, like double click the side button to confirm, I mean, that's like 2 clicks, right? And so that means that you're constrained on how many clicks your cancellation flow can be. In many cases, companies now are using the Blinkist style trial explainer, and maybe they have a video paywall. So like often companies are working with more like 3 to 5 screens that they can argue they're using to convert a user into a subscriber, which means they have a little bit more latitude. But rarely are you going to have more than 5 screens in the cancellation flow after the click to cancel rule goes into effect, because very few companies have more than that in converting subscribers in the first place. And so it just means you have to be very expedient. I'm seeing one other question from Bahar. So after cancellation, can we send reminding emails to keep the connection with the user? How those emails should be to invite users softly come back? Yeah, so what you're describing is basically win-back campaigns, win-back communications that try to convince the user to come back and resubscribe. So yes, you can absolutely send reminder emails. I'm at least not aware of anything in the click-to-cancel rule that says you can't reach back out to users and try to convince them to subscribe. Now, having said that, what you don't want to do is just be a broken record and send people emails every day or even every week begging and pleading them to resubscribe. It won't work. They will end up just unsubscribing from your email. It will hurt the quality of your email channel because your unsubscribe rates will go up. And so at the end of the day, it's kind of like use common sense, right? Like if somebody is canceling your service, then realistically, I would say you've got between 1 and 3 shots to reactivate them. And beyond 3 shots, like at that point, it's just going to fall on deaf ears because they're going to ignore you. So what does that mean? It means you probably shouldn't email them right away. If they've gone through the cancellation flow and you've already offered them the discount to stay and they rejected it, give it a little bit of time, probably between a week and a month. But what I've often seen is maybe 30 days after cancellation, you can send them a follow-up email and just say, hey, it's been a little while. Remind them again of the premium features, potentially offer a discount. And then you kind of want to like, it's like spaced repetition. The further out you get, the more time you want spaced between win-back emails. Duolingo does this with push notifications, right? Like if you're really active, if you're a daily active user, you're getting push notifications every day, reminding you to study, reminding you not to lose your streak. But if you start to go dormant, the space between notifications gets longer and longer. At first it's a few days, then it's a week, then it's multiple weeks, then it's a month. And so similarly with these win-back emails, it's a very good strategy and you should absolutely do it, but don't do it more than 2 to 3 times and make sure that it's getting increasingly spaced out if users aren't converting. Those were great. Thanks for all the questions. Please keep them coming. Okay, Olga asked, what do you think about specials like Photoshop is using after user tapped on cancel? Like user wants to cancel sub and you say pay only $10 instead of $30. Yeah, well, to me, this is highly related to what we covered in some of these examples, right? Like both Strava and Headspace. Headspace is maybe the best example where they're offering this 50% discount if the user chooses to stay. So pay $10 instead of $30. I mean, effectively that's a 67% discount. It's a 2/3 discount. And so I've seen companies offer percentage discounts. I've seen them phrase it in terms of dollar amounts. I've also seen like chess.com is one of our clients right now. Chess.com offers an extended trial in many cases. So instead of giving a user a discount, they just say, all right, you're on a 7-day free trial. Instead of canceling, why don't we extend your trial to 14 days and give the user a little bit more time to experience the value? So there's all sorts of different ways you can try to convince the user to give you a second chance. It can be a discount, it can be an extended trial, it can be other things. But yeah, I think those all fall kind of into the same category.
Yeah, probably Photoshop is one of the example where you can like it's impossible to cancel a subscription and for other products. Yeah.
That's a good call out. I haven't used Photoshop in such a long time. I actually just had Olivier Lemarie, who's the VP of Growth at Photoroom, on my podcast. The episode went out last week, and so I know a lot about Photoroom. I don't know so much about Photoshop.
Yeah. Following this question about discounts and all the stuff, I also seen the mechanic with a pause in subscription, so you can like hold it for like 2 months, 3 months without recurring billing.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? How?
Yeah, that's a good call out. I've seen some companies do that. I think that can make a lot of sense for very particular categories. So meal kits are probably the best example, where okay, you're subscribing to Blue Apron or HelloFresh, and you're ordering 10 meals every month or 2 meals a week, but you go on vacation or your kids go off to summer camp or something changes, and so you don't need the meals with as much frequency. But if you cancel the subscription altogether, then there's a good chance you're going to forget to ever come back. So what those companies do very consistently is offer a subscription pause. Another good example, I mean, it's sort of similar to Meal Kit. So I am a big overnight oats guy. So I subscribe to Holos, which is one of the overnight oats providers, and I get a shipment every month or two. But I go through these ebbs and flows where like I don't need as many of them. And so they also offer the ability to either pause the subscription or just reduce the number of packets that I'm ordering in my overnight oats subscription at any given time. I think for companies like that, it makes a lot of sense. I think for a digital subscription app, you can try it, but I think in a lot of cases, it doesn't make as much sense because like you kind of know what it is. The usage is probably a little bit less variable than with physical goods. And so I just think it's probably a less effective tactic for a lot of categories, but for some categories, it's very effective.
We have another question from Sud.
Yeah, this is great. I love all these questions.
Yeah.
This is more engagement than we sometimes get. So please do keep them coming. To me, this is like where most of the value comes from in these sessions is getting to answer your specific questions. So can offering large discounts like 85% have a negative effect because they don't seem realistic? Well, a couple things. I mean, one, yes. To directly answer your question, I think if you offer a discount that's that large, it's sort of like, wait a minute, if you can offer me an 85% discount, then why was I paying 100% to begin with? It almost feels like you got hoodwinked in the first place if the company is able to offer a discount that large. And by the way, I would also argue that there are very few subscription companies that can offer an 85% discount, unless it's for like 1 month and then it goes back to the standard price, because the App Store fees alone, like with an 85% discount, you're not making any money. The second thing is, I think that I think at some point, like the unit economics just don't work with a discount that large. I already covered that. And the third point is, I think it can kind of erode the quality of your brand. So ideally, you want an aspirational brand that feels like you're one of the top 2 to 3 companies in your category, and people should feel lucky to be a premium subscriber. They should feel proud to be a subscriber of your product, right? Like Ladder is a good example of this. Ladder is another strength training app that is a much higher touch version of Fitbod, right? Very personalized workouts tied to an individual personal trainer. You're in a group with other people who are sharing the app with you. You have the same workouts every week. So it's this very aspirational brand at a higher price point. And if they start offering even 50% discounts, let alone 75, 85% discounts, then people start to question, like, how valuable is this product really? So this depends a little bit on your brand and product strategy and how you're positioned in the market relative to competitors. But my advice would be, if you're going to offer discounts, and I am a fan of discounts as long as they're targeted and reasonable, just make sure that the unit economics will support them and that your discount strategy fits with, are you on the higher or lower end of the market? If you're on the lower end of the market, you can be a little bit more aggressive with discounts as long as the unit economics will work.
Yeah, it's, one more negative effect that you might have with this discounts, that people start sharing that in Reddit and forums and chats. So more and more people know about that and exploit these mechanics. They start in the subscription and cancel it right away, just to get this discount. So be careful with that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I will say that I think if anything, companies are a little bit overly concerned about that. In my experience, it's not that people don't talk. They will occasionally post on Reddit or even on like App Store ratings. But the reality is people are busy, and it's not like the vast majority of your customers are going to Reddit and reading these forums and then being like, oh, I can save $20 if I cancel and then resubscribe. Certainly some of that is going to happen. So you should be aware of that. But I do think, to Andre's point, like if you offer a 25 or a 50% discount, less likely that's going to lead to a sea change of people, taking advantage. If you offer an 85% discount, I'd be more worried about it, because that's like, at that point, people are just offended that they ever paid 100% in the first place.
Yeah.
Arthur asks, what has been the impact of improved cancellation flows to disputed transactions? Yeah, I wish I had hard data on this. I will say, I have worked with previous companies that have run into real, I call it like dispute hell, right? Like dispute rates, if your dispute rate gets over, I think it's 0.6%, that's when you start to get notified that you're like in the early warning program of having dispute rates that are too high. And if you're using a payment service provider like Stripe or Adyen, they will warn you about this on behalf of the credit card networks like Visa, because the credit card networks eventually will kick you off. Like they will not serve your product anymore if your dispute rates are too high for too long. So 0.6%, at least when I was looking at this last, is the early warning threshold. And then I think it's if you're above 0.8% or 1%, that's when you start to get in the penalty box. And then if you're in the penalty box for more than like 4 to 6 months, then it starts to really affect your business, because you'll get more and more warnings. You'll have to get dispute rates really low in order to get out of the penalty box. You also have to be low enough you have to be low enough for multiple months. And so it can be very disruptive to your business if you don't stay on top of this. And then, like I said, in a worst case, if it goes on for too long, Stripe will kick you off, Visa will kick you off. And so you don't want to mess with this. Yeah. Maria, I think you nailed it. Like, discounts have a corrosive effect on your brand if you do them too often and if you do them at too large an amount. It's kind of the reverse effect of, think of luxury items like Gucci or Prada, right? Like the reason that they're able to charge such ridiculously high prices is because they have this aspirational brand. And it's not that you're paying whatever, $10,000 for a purse. It's you're paying $10,000 for a status symbol, so that when people see you holding that purse, they will know that you have a lot of status and a lot of money. And so even though that's a very different industry, I think it's sort of the inverse of that, which is if you're constantly saying 75% off, 85% off, 95% off, it's like, well, okay, well then your product wasn't that valuable to begin with. The example I always use on this, and look, Booking.com has been very successful. So clearly it's worked for them. But Booking.com is one of these platforms where you go to their website and like everything is urgent, only one spot left, like book in the next 10 minutes or you'll lose your opportunity. And then it's discount after discount after discount and sale after sale. And you just kind of feel like you're being hoodwinked. Now, it seems to work for them, but contrast that to Airbnb or TripAdvisor. And they're a little bit of a different, one's pure play booking platform, the other one, they're different products. But Airbnb, TripAdvisor, those are like very aspirational brands in the travel space, whereas Booking.com is on the other end of the spectrum. They're just trying to get people to convert. And so there are pros and cons to doing that, but you just want to make sure that it fits your product positioning and your strategy. Okay, I'm going to move on to click-to-cancel provision, but please keep the questions coming. And I suspect there'll be a lot of questions in this next section because this is really important. So this click-to-cancel rule will go into effect July 14th. So we're, T-minus 18 days away. And it has some very important implications. So at a high level, it's going to impose the following restrictions. Important information must be truthful, clear, and easy to find. So this doesn't just affect the cancellation flow, it actually affects the onboarding conversion funnel as well. If you're using tactics that are really misleading in terms of the trial duration, or when the user will be billed, or whether or not they'll be reminded, or what the subscription price is, even things like couching annual subscription prices in terms of the price per day. Like, I think all of these tactics that consumer subscription apps have started to use because they juice conversion are going to come under more scrutiny once this rule goes into effect. So it's good to be aware of those on the front end. people need to know what they're agreeing to before they sign up. So I believe that I'm not 100% certain of this, and we're going to learn a lot more as the rule starts to go into effect and we see what's actually being enforced. But I believe they're talking about actually having a checkbox that users need to click before they subscribe up front to confirm that they're agreeing to a recurring subscription plan. And then on the back end, there always has to be a way to cancel that's as quick and easy as it was to sign up. So the two key points here are medium. The medium needs to be the same. If they subscribed on web, they need to be able to cancel on web. If they subscribed on a mobile app, they need to be able to cancel on a mobile app. And then two, it needs to be every bit as quick and easy as it was to convert. So same number of clicks or fewer, no misleading tactics. I think one other important implication, and this relates to the best practices I was sharing before, you're still allowed to introduce a survey that asks the user why they're canceling. You're still allowed to offer a discount, but you can't force the user to go through all of that before they see the option to cancel. And so you're going to need to show these things side by side. Like the user will need to be able to cancel as you are asking them why they're canceling, and as you're offering them a discount, you won't be able to force them through multiple screens before they finally get to the cancellation screen. And then the last point is violators will be liable for penalties. And this, again, is an area, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't have a lot of expertise here, but I've started to read up on it. And it sounds like the penalties can be pretty significant, like in the thousands of dollars per infraction. So this is something you don't want to just ignore. And then in terms of just a little bit more context, so the new law will go into effect July 14th. The origin story here is the original negative option rule that the FTC imposed on offline subscription businesses goes all the way back to 1973. These were like newspaper memberships or other offline, oftentimes media businesses. In 2019, that was the year when the FTC started to begin reviewing public feedback regarding complaints about these online subscription services because people felt like it was misleading. And then I think that just got way worse during the pandemic. And then in March 2023, the FTC issued a notice of proposed rulemaking. So this was sort of when the click-to-cancel rule first started to come into the public discourse. And then over the last, call it 18 months, there was an informal hearing, then a public hearing, then the FTC announced the click-to-cancel rule in October 2024. Originally, it was supposed to go into effect in May of this year, and then they gave it sort of this is what often happens. They gave people a couple months of additional grace period. So now it's going to affect July 14th, but I doubt that they will push it back again. And so I would just say, if you've never heard of this rule or you're unclear on what implications it has for your business, just make sure that you're looking it up and you're aware of what changes you need to make. Originally, I had a slide in here with a specific example from one of my clients, which is chess.com. I took it out just because I wasn't able to get explicit confirmation that they were comfortable with the slide. But at a high level, what I'll say is, they're very much going through their current cancellation flow, counting the number of clicks, counting the number of screens, looking at things like how they approach the survey on why you're canceling and when they introduce any sort of offer to stay. And they literally have like a Figma file with designs laid out where they've made explicit changes to make sure they're in compliance with the new rule. So I can't show you the visual, but hopefully that illustrates the steps that you should be taking to just make sure that you're in compliance within the next few weeks. Okay, so I'm going to wrap things up. We've got about 15 minutes left for questions, but before I do that, just to recap the most important points. So if you don't take anything else away from this session, these are the 4 most important points I want to leave you with. Number 1, subscriber retention separates the best consumer subscription apps from the rest. So P95 apps significantly outperform P75. You want to be one of those P95 apps, or at least P90 if you can. And cancellation flows are one of the many levers that can lead to higher retention. Number 2, companies following best practices make it easy for consumers to find cancellation flows, but psychologically difficult for them to follow through. Number 3, Headspace, Strava, Fitbod, and Matter are a few examples of companies that have really well-designed cancellation flows and follow best practices. So feel free to follow some of those best practices, and you can calibrate them to the stage of company you're at and how many resources you have to devote to cancellation. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, the FTC's click-to-cancel rule will go into effect on July 14th with restrictions on cancellation flows that have important implications. So just make sure that you're aware of those if you're operating in the US at all. So that's it for my content today. We've already had a lot of good questions, but would love to open it up for Q&A. And if folks have anything else they want to ask, I'm here to answer them as best I can.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phil. It's like a lot of information, a lot of insights.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think cancellation flow is like kind of like underrated thing for marketers and for product managers. And It used to be like the also growth lever all the time, so you can balance your revenue uplift with your like negative level and bad reviews and all the stuff and disputes and chargebacks. But now I think it's like it's even more important because you can have a penalty for incompliant flow. So you need to experiment it with that more thoroughly, not just like balance revenue and balance conversion rates and retention rates, but also to like I know match that's requirements. Okay, we have one more question. Should cancellation flows differ on mobile and web?
Yeah, good question. I think at the highest level, there's no reason that mobile and web cancellation flows have to be different. And one of the things I mentioned earlier is that I have seen a good number of clients actually use a mobile web view, even if a user is canceling from the native app. They'll just kick the user out to a mobile web view so that they can maintain a single set of screens, as opposed to maintaining a native app flow on iOS, a native app flow on Android, and a web flow.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look back at the Fitbod example that I showed, that's a good example where you're starting in the mobile app, but then they move you to a mobile web view. So I don't think there's any reason why they have to be different. Having said that, this is one of many examples where the FTC click-to-cancel rule could have an impact, because you want to make sure that you're able to support users who converted on web to be able to cancel on web, and who converted in the native app to be able to cancel on the native app. I don't think the click-to-cancel rule says that if a user converted in the native app, you can't use a mobile web view, because it's still the same device. I don't think that would cross any boundaries, but good to do your own research on that. The only other thing I'll say is, and Andre and I were talking about this a few minutes before we started the webinar, the recent Epic versus Apple ruling that forces Apple to allow developers and companies to allow their consumers to convert into subscriptions on web in the same way that they're converting in the native app. There have been a lot of companies now that are experimenting with what are being called app to web flows. It's sort of the reverse of web to app. So app to web flows that take the user from the native app to a web checkout flow, because then, number one, they can avoid the app store fees, and number two, retention tends to be higher on web just because there are fewer involuntary churn issues around payment failures. I think that so far, a lot of the early experimentation on app to web hasn't worked for upfront subscriber conversion, because users are so used to the sort of walled garden of being in the iOS ecosystem, and they trust that, and it feels more secure. So some companies are starting to break through, but a lot of the early experiments have shown that the conversion hit is high enough that you don't actually come out ahead on revenue, even by avoiding the app store fees. But with cancellation flows, what's interesting is, at that point, the user's already been subscribing by definition. They trust your app, or at least in some cases they do. And if you're offering them a discount, then what you can do is you can route them to a web-based checkout flow to redeem the discount, and then avoid the app store fees on the new discounted subscription. So that is one very particular application of app to web that could be worth exploring if you haven't already, is applying that to the cancellation flow.
Yeah, and like just to mention that Funnelfox customers can see templates for already pre-designed for cancellation flows, so to figure out how it should look like in app and web, so you can just use it and that's it. And yeah, usually it's like it's a split between there is a one screen that splits these users that subscribe through in-app purchases with Apple infrastructure, and through web. So you can redirect users to web payment, web flow, of the cancellation flow, and App Store flow. Okay, any more questions, guys?
These have been great. So if folks have any more they're sitting on.
Yeah. A lot of questions. Yeah, it's a really great consultative session. It seems that we don't have any more questions, so I think we can wrap it up. Thank you very much for your questions, for your involvement in the conversation. Thank you, Phil. It was great conversation, and insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Andre, and Funnel Fox team. And this was great. Oh, I did see
Yeah, we
one other
got one more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always one last one, and there can be 2 or 3. So if you have more, feel free to jump in. We still got time. But does the new FTC Click-to-Cancel rule that takes effect on July 14th apply only to mobile apps, or does it also cover web-based subscription sales? I believe that this applies to any. They use the term negative option, which basically means you're opted in, and now you have the quote negative option to cancel the subscription. I believe it applies to any subscription product. So I don't think it's even just mobile or web. I think it can be offline subscriptions too. But yes, it definitely would apply to both mobile apps and web.
Sure.
It's not specific to like native iPhone and Android apps.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that it's mostly related to web-based subscriptions.
Yep.
But there are a lot of companies, like big companies, like Adobe, for example, that push users to give a call to customer support to just cancel the subscription. It's like and you just holding on the line for like several minutes, waiting for an agent to connect with you. So it's like it's impossible to cancel. And I think this is like the main reason why this law was introduced.
Yep, I agree. Great. Well, thanks for that one last question, Sud. Yeah, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me, Andre.
Yeah.
And thanks to the Funnel Fox team, and thanks for all your questions.
Bye.